When learning to draw the skull, one of the biggest challenges I've found is seeing beyond the complex, intricate surfaces and understanding the underlying structure. In order to practice this, I took a photo of my model of a skull next to a simplified planar version of a skull. And the goal was to first look at the simplified version of the skull and then jump across to draw the skull. So the simplified version was fresh in my mind in the couple of seconds before, where I've been drawing the mound of the mouth or the cranium or something like that. Okay, let's jump in. So first things first, I do my usual, which is mark the top and the bottom of, well, first I'm marking the top and the bottom of the simplified version of the skull. And then the actual skull. Now I'm doing the left and right. Actually, I did, on this occasion, I did the left extremity and the right extremity of both of the objects together. And then, yeah, you can see I started to put in the left extremity of the skull, not the simplified skull. Here I started, you can't see that in the reference, but I started to do a circle because I was going to do, change my mind in a bit, you'll see, but I was going to do a sphere, because it's quite a nice idea to always have a sphere lit, almost like a key, lit in the same place as your objects are lit, just so you can keep referring to that if you kind of lose where your light is and if you lose track of values and things like that. Okay, so as usual, keeping everything to straight lines. Right, I'm just keeping everything straight, and I started to put in the back of the mandible. But I think I did this for the most part, because I'm looking back on this now. Yeah, for the most part, I did one line to represent the edge of an object on the simplified, and then the same line on the actual skull. So that's what I did with the mandible. I'm using willow charcoal for this, with a blending stump. And now I'm thinking on the simplified skull, I'm starting to carve out the, because I've got the brow ridge, I'm starting to carve out the eye socket. Again, a really important, a really good thing to look out for when you're doing portraits and just heads in general, which is the eye socket, because again, it's bone, so it's solid, it won't move around like muscles or flesh. So coming down to a bit of just like simplified, super simplified muscle structure of the neck. The bottom of the 5-value chart is just the paper, and that's going to represent highlights that I do towards the end. The second one up from the bottom represents mid-tone or half-tone, but also I like to use that as how light I press when I'm in this phase, which is like the lay-in construction, the basic construction of the shapes and the forms. Start with as flat as possible, but then at this point I'm starting to think of volumetric shapes, because I've already got in, we can see there on the skull, well, on the simplified, I simplified the shape of the cranium, which is just like the mass of the head where the brain is encased. I simplified that into maybe like 3 straight lines, and then I went over, you can see them on both, with a few more straight lines, with a few more angle breaks. I put in the nose socket, the temporal ridge on both, and I was starting to just loosely represent some of the planes on the head on the left. At this point, I am starting to add in the on the skull the change of plane where that cheekbone kind of curves underneath. I'm heading towards both of the craniums giving the impression that they're kind of spherical, even though actually I've just put in a series of straight-ish lines. I personally like a slightly illustrative look in that with my drawings. Sometimes I like a painting as well, But with my drawings, I quite like it when the outside of the object and the lines are a little bit heavier. I want to start finding where the core shadow, basically. I was starting to think that on the top of the eye socket at this point. If you don't know what the core shadow is, this is going to show where basically the light turns into shadow. Basically thinking about the shadow shape, the contour of the shadow shape. All right, so now we're into the contours, the heavier contours of the skull. I remember I was trying to keep in mind what I was thinking when I'd drawn the simplified skull. So here's the famous core shadow shape, contour of the shadow shape with the actual skull now. But I wanted to get in a little bit more angular plane work on the actual skull. So now just blocking in the shadow in a kind of, I wasn't really trying to nail the exact value. So I'll come back to it with fresh eyes, which is always good. I wanted to slightly take the edge off all the whiteness of the forehead area on the simplified skull. Now I went so heavy down there because I wanted to get the maximum, the lowest value that I could, which is the drop shadow. It's the shadow right underneath the platform of the simplified skull that you can see there. So I guess I wanted to make sure that nothing competed with that, because that's the part where the least amount of light can get. So that means that my core shadows must stay away from that value. Okay, darkening now the eye socket on the real skull, and the eye is always drawn to an area that is higher in contrast. At the moment, if you look at the skull behind my hand on the right, my eye is getting pulled towards it looks a bit more 3D, it's getting pulled towards the eye socket on the right because the contrast is higher. Because the line I did for the core shadow, just at the top of the brow ridge, talking about the skull on the right here, is darker than any of the values that I put on the left, on the shaded side of the skull. Now I'm just trying to define some of those quite intricate plane changes just under the bottom of the eye socket on the skull. But I didn't even do it with the charcoal stick. I just did it straight with the blending stump. If you want to put in a block of value that is really subtle, I prefer to just use the blending stump straight away, as opposed to filling something in with charcoal first and then blending it. So I did a few layers on the mound of the mouth of the skull on the right, which took me a while to realize actually with charcoal. You can kind of do an initial pass, I guess you could call it, where you do light values, just lightly showing where light and shadow is. And then you can further work into your shadows, doing layer after layer, but applying thin layers of charcoal as opposed to diving straight in with super darks. But yeah, if you work slowly, then it's a bit easier to like undo, or in this case, to just erase. There are two highlights on that cranium. There's that one that's just above the eye socket, and there's a one a little bit further up. I outlined them both. So now I know everything outside of that fence, of those lines, is going to have to be pushed back a bit. Because if that's the highlight, everything else around it has to be a bit darker. The highlight is going to be the lightest, which is going to be the paper in this case. It's going to be the lightest part in the drawing, of course. As much as possible, I tend to, with the charcoal, draw in the direction of the plane. Usually, I ignore reflected light towards the beginning of drawings when I just want to know where the light is and where the light isn't. So I know that I'm going to make some areas probably a little bit too dark, and then have to go in afterwards and take some off to get the reflected light. But it's just, I find it helpful at the beginning to binarize everything. This area's got light on it, this area doesn't have light on it. So this area must be lighter than all of this area. I was a bit unsure on whether to use my finger, honestly, to blend with charcoal, because I'd read different things about, there's grease, there's oil on your finger, so don't use it, could yellow the paper and it kind of interferes. I found that that is the case with graphite, but then it was while I was reading Norman Rockwell's book on how he makes a picture. He said that he uses his, as I'm doing now, he uses his little finger, and he likes doing that. I've found that using a little finger is good because you don't have to put the charcoal down and then pick up a blending stump or another instrument that you want to use to blend something. It's a bit more immediate if you just flick to your small finger, smudge something, and then you're straight back in with your thumb and index finger holding the charcoal. I think it's always good to keep your brain active about what this photograph has represented, and to think that I'm not drawing this photograph, I'm trying to draw the object that has been photographed. Think about what it is. Think about the plane that you're drawing or painting of the real object, not of the photograph. If I'm thinking about the general values of the skull, I definitely wanted the lightest values to be on the top of the nose and those two highlights I mentioned, on the brow ridge and then on the forehead. I didn't really want the jaw, especially the whole area underneath the cheekbone, value-wise, to be interfering with this quick read. I had a dilemma to solve here, which was, how much detail am I going to put in teeth? The exercise wasn't really about rendering teeth. It was actually about trying to see things as simply as possible with, I guess, just enough detail to communicate what the object is. So in this case, the skull. Again, a little bit of cross-hatching with the drop shadow underneath the jaw, just so I can keep my mind switched on for being aware of what kind of primitive volumes I'm drawing. Because as I was drawing the horizontal lines, the hatching of the cylinder that the skull was on top of, I was trying to remember, even though in the photo it looks flat, I was trying to remember this is a cylinder. It goes around. I think with loads of aspects of picture making, probably loads of art forms, what's interesting to look at or experience is variety, because one thing doesn't exist without the other. So if you have one part that's angular, maybe that will look more angular if there is another part that is more curved. If you're not trying to directly 100% copy a photo reference, there comes a point where you have to stop, of course, you have to finish. Since I can remember, I've always struggled to know when to stop drawing or painting something. But especially if you, like I said, if you don't want to copy 100% your reference, if you want to make some creative decisions, it's tricky. Well, for me, it's tricky. I found it very tricky. What I usually tend to do is, basically draw until I get tired. I can feel that I'm just making kind of sloppy decisions now, so I think I should stop. Then go away, not look at the image for really as long as I can. But if I've set up everything in my studio, so it's in the way and I have to paint it the next day for me to then be able to put it away, making sure I don't look at it overnight is key. This exercise for me, really helped me to simplify forms before adding detail. It's also one of the best ways to improve your understanding of structure, turning things into primitive forms first. If you struggle with drawing heads or skulls, try this. Start with the primitive volumes first and then add complexity as you go. If you want to draw along with me, I've included a link to my blog post in the description below. On my blog post, I've included some downloadable resources, including the reference image that I used. I hope this video helped. Thanks so much for watching, and hopefully see you in the next video.